They say we're loud, opinionated, afraid, telling us to hush, dim our historical light. But darlings, we're the heartbeat, sharp and keen, unveiling the truth behind the silver screen.
History harpies hear us roar. Through the ages we explore. Fashion, film, and TV's lore.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Christine.
And we're so excited to be in double-digit episodes.
We are.
This is our second episode that will be a hometown devoted episode this week to the state of Maine.
State of Maine. I'm so excited. So last time we were in the city of brotherly love, the fighting city of Philly. And today we're going to go to the, I don't want to say more peaceful, more relaxed.
Scary.
It's definitely not scary. Scary and creepy, perhaps.
Scary and creepy Maine.
Scary and creepy Maine. But my home state and a state I love an awful, awful lot.
Yes. To know Christine is to know a lot about Maine. So why don't you tell us, Christine, since last week we went over some of the Philly foods and the cheesesteak of it all, what is your favorite Maine staple food?
Absolutely, no question, especially since I became a vegetarian.
Okay.
That is the original, real Italian sandwich.
Okay.
And anyone who is listening to this, who is from the state of Maine, will understand exactly what I mean.
Okay.
This is a very particular sandwich. It is not a hoagie. It is not a grinder. It is a meat and vegetable sandwich. I don't eat the meat. I get the vegetarian version with no meat. But what is very super special about the Maine Italian is it requires super sour pickles and it is doused with olive oil at the end.
Okay.
This sandwich I'm not making this up, this sandwich has never been able to be replicated outside of the state of Maine.
Okay.
Ever. People try, and it's just not possible.
So if you were to order a vegetarian version of this Maine sandwich, what do you say?
You just say, I want a veggie Italian.
Okay.
And immediately, someone knows what you're talking about.
And there are enough vegetables to substitute in for the Italian, what I assume
Absolutely.
are like whatever those Italian meats are, salami,
Well, just
capicola.
ham. Just ham.
Oh, it's just ham.
You can get other versions of it, but the base, the platonic form of this sandwich is ham, American cheese, I know it sounds, tomatoes, black olives, chopped onions, green peppers.
Okay.
I might be missing something, but again, SPO. Salt, pepper, and oil.
Okay.
Doused, as I said, doused with olive
Doused with
oil.
olive
But
oil.
the pickles absolutely have to be sour, and this is where people cannot replicate the original Maine Italian. But one thing that's really interesting about this is Maine, especially southern Maine, where I'm from, it had a huge, huge influx of Italian immigrants, of course, in the early 20th century.
Okay.
And a particular family, the Reale family in southern Maine, has this chain, still existing today, chain of what we call in Maine, corner stores that sell Italians. And then they just spread throughout the state. And you would not expect that to be the paradigmatic food. You would expect, of course, seafood.
Of course.
And I do also love fried clams, I will say.
Okay.
Fried clams with the stomachs. That is an important component of real fried clams. The stomach. Anyway.
So we're not talking about lobsters.
No. And that actually feeds it, no pun intended, very well into the issue of class that will come up so much when we talk about the state of Maine.
Right.
Because,
the
of course,
lobster roll.
I was working class state of Maine, and we did not eat much lobster. And, of course, do you know what is wrong with the Maine lobster roll? I hate to say this. I hate to say this.
I can't imagine one thing that's wrong with it, but go ahead.
Mayonnaise. That is for the places that want to stretch their lobster dollar and make more profits.
Yes.
They will put in tons of filler mayonnaise, which is disgusting.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
Well, again, I may have to amend my mayonnaise ban in talking about a lobster roll.
Okay.
Although I prefer my lobster roll, the ratio to be mayonnaise, not so much, but unfortunately I will still eat it because it is so delicious. Yeah, I will. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few films today that have to do with the state of Maine, or were inspired by the state of Maine, or reference the state of Maine. And we are starting with What did we say? We're going to start with in the bedroom.
We are going, actually, that's a nice lobster segue, because
Okay.
the title of this film, In the Bedroom, actually refers to lobsters, as strange as that sounds.
Okay.
So this is a film that Lauren did not watch, but has seen.
I have seen
right?
it.
Saw it when it first came out.
When it first came out.
Several years ago. I think it was, 2001, maybe?
Right.
And what is, I think, really perfectly Maine about this film is, for one thing, it was actually filmed in Maine. It was filmed in Camden and Rockport, where the film is set. But it is from a short story that was set in Massachusetts originally by the really wonderful writer Andre Dubus. And In the Bedroom tells the story of a couple that has lived in Camden for a very long time, a doctor and his wife. She is very clearly not from Maine. It is very clear that she is an outsider. And they have a college-age son who is about to go off to graduate school, who ends up in a relationship with an older single mother. And the relationship ends very badly in that the son is murdered by the girlfriend's ex-husband. Played, by the way, by William Mapother, I've never known, who is Tom Cruise's cousin, who was also in Lost, who also played a villain in Lost. Anyway, and so the movie deals with the grief of the parents, played by Tom Wilkinson and Sissy Spacek, whom we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yes.
It is about their grief, how they deal with the fact that their son has died, his particular questions about sticking around and potentially being with this woman for the rest of his life, which unfortunately is quite short. And the reason why I say there's a lobster connection is that when the son is thinking that he will stay put and be in a relationship, he thinks that he will become a lobsterman. He has been doing this part-time. And the bedroom refers to a part of the lobster trap where a lobster is kept. And if more than 2 lobsters end up in the bedroom of the lobster trap, they will begin to turn on each other. And so it's a very nice allegory for what ends up happening with this really, really vicious love triangle between the son, his girlfriend, and her very vicious and murderous ex-husband.
This is giving me OC vibes with Ryan and going to the boat and going to work on the barge. And one could imagine the actor, what's his name, who was Ryan's brother, who
Logan Marshall Green.
Logan Marshall Green being, who of course is in And Just Like That.
Yes.
Being the husband, right?
Absolutely.
The ex-husband who
Yes.
shoots Marissa Tomei's, who shoots the son.
Yes, Frank.
I'm
the
just
character,
thinking this whole situation is to me giving some OC vibes.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because what is so interesting about, of course, the entire film, but also the character who does murder the son, is that class comes up in a really weird way, in that he is kind of a lowlife who hangs around in bars, gets into a lot of fights, but his father owns a cannery, and so his father is the big employer in the town.
Right.
And so there's very much this sort of paradox that he is from a more affluent family, but he really is sort of Maine working class. And this is something that is taken from the original short story, which is called Killings, by Andre Dubus, where it's the same kind of thing. A young man who is murderous, who is violent, who beats his wife, who again is drinking and taking drugs, but who is from a more affluent family, and what that actually means. So I do think it is very, in some ways, redolent of the OC, but significantly more depressing. It is one of the saddest
that is
films
one
ever.
of the reasons why I took a pass on this one. Just couldn't do it again, and I knew you were watching it. And a lot of our other films this week are not exactly uplifting party films. So I sat it out, and I can't say I regret that decision after listening to you kind of recap it for me. Although I remember the performances being really incredible.
They're spectacular.
And the film being pretty incredible, but just... Again, maybe a little too much for me this week. So
well, and one of the things that's interesting about it is that you and I both loved Tar, which of course is another the third film by Todd Field, who's such a remarkable filmmaker, but who has made almost nothing. And In the Bedroom was his first film. Right. The equally depressing Little Children was his second, which I never ever want to see again. But what is also interesting to me about In the Bedroom is he actually managed to make it more depressing than the original short story. which I think is really remarkable, because in the film, the son who is murdered is their only child.
Yeah.
And that this is very much played up
Yeah.
as part of the plot, that this is kind of the end of their line. And not to spoil it too much for anyone who is listening, but the huge moral question that hangs over the film is it licit to murder the man who killed the son? And so Matt, the Tom Wilkinson character, he does end up killing him. And that, of course, is why the Andre Dubus short story, it's killings plural, because it's both of these, and it's really, really fascinating. But what I do like is that Sissy Spacek, she is an outsider. She went to Brown, which of course we always know, right, in a TV, much like in Gossip Girl. In a film or television, that is the immediate tell, right? But anyway, but it's very interesting, again, in terms of class, in terms of being an outsider, in terms of this kind of rough-hewn sort of working class vibe that you get that is juxtaposed with a much more affluent vibe. And it's just, I think it actually is a really great Maine film in that sense.
I had forgotten the detail of Sissy Spacek going to Brown.
Absolutely, yes. Why? Who knows?
And then we can link again to Gossip Girl, to you with Beck having gone to Brown, and that working class, what's his name? Joe, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The Brown, upper echelon contrast.
Exactly.
It seems like Brown is just a marker for elite, obnoxious, outsider, somebody who's just going to come in and be super snotty.
And that's the thing, is that's something else that is introduced into the film that is not in the original short story. Not just that the wife didn't go to Brown, but the idea that there is real marital conflict between the couple because she is an outsider.
Right.
And the whole vibe is that the Tom Wilkinson character, that his dad was working class, he himself is now a doctor, the son then might become working class again, and the idea that this moves so quickly in generations, which is certainly true in the state of Maine, absolutely. And so it is interesting that Sissy Spacek, she is this person who clearly has lived there for so long, but cannot find her footing in this community, which again just adds this other component of how sad and just really heartbreaking this film is. Okay,
well, one thing I'm hearing from you, which you might push back on, is this is a community working class, and we've got some of these downtrodden characters, and you're finding it gripping, and it's sounding to me like Rocky. Except that there are no brown interlopers in Rocky, that everyone is 100% Philly. There is no murder.
Yes, yes.
Maybe you just need a little murder in your movies.
Perhaps. But see, but here's something that I do think makes Maine distinct. Okay. Right? And here's my argument, which is not the case, sadly, for the Philadelphia neighborhood of Rocky Balboa. And that is what we see in the bedroom, and it's in other movies and stuff about Maine too, is you have, of course, working class people who are nevertheless living in these beautiful coastal areas.
Yes.
Right. And so there's one scene in the bedroom where there's the local school that Sissy Spacek's character works at. They're having an outdoor choir concert, and it's all different kinds of people in terms of class, right? Okay. Including working class people. But you are seeing a harbor with boats, right? Yep. These beautiful boats, not miserable Billy Joel trawlers, right? And obviously not mega yachts, but beautiful boats. And so it's this, again, weird juxtaposition. Tom Wilkinson is playing poker with his buddies, and something that I actually thought was very unrealistic is, so he's playing poker with his kind of working class buddies, although one of them also owns a restaurant, and one of his buddies spouts poetry all the time, and this is kind of his thing. And near the end of the film, he starts reciting a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a poet who was born in Portland, whose house you can still go see in Portland, and he recites a poem about Portland, Maine, this character in the film. And so, again, I'm like, I'm not sure I know too many working class guys from the state of Maine who would recite Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poems.
That's also giving very Goodwill Hunting.
Yes,
right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But I that's what I would say is so strange about Maine, right? In part because of the locale, in part because of the geography, in part because of how small the state is in terms of population. Right. But with all of that space, I think class lines get really, really confused.
Okay, in ways in which they do not in
Perhaps,
Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia.
Okay. So
Or in the South, also, for example.
Okay.
Or in the South, perhaps.
Okay.
Anyway.
So I told some of our listeners, some of our 9 listeners, that we were doing this Maine week, and the first thing they said to me was, "Oh, you're going to watch a lot of Stephen King movies or talk about a lot of Stephen King books." And I said to Christine, "So what are our Stephen King picks?" And she said, "None." And I said, "How is that possible? Because everyone associates Stephen King with Maine, including me, and we've got to throw something in." And I just feel like we're going to disappoint. That I don't want to turn our 9 listeners into 4 listeners. So, and Christine doesn't like scary movies, so there's that issue. I don't mind them. I'm fine watching them. And in fact, like old scary movies aren't even scary anymore. So anyway, so we had a discussion about this, and because of the sissy Spacek of it all, we settled on me watching Carrie because she's in both films, okay, and then
Decades apart.
And then Christine weighing in on the Stephen King and Maine and all the various iterations of Stephen King artifacts lurking around.
I can go on at great length.
Okay.
Even though I did not watch, I of course have seen Carrie, and I've seen a lot of other Stephen King films. I've read a lot of the books, so I can contribute.
Okay.
But
I saw Carrie like 2 nights ago, and I had not seen it, I mean, probably for, I don't know, a decade at least. I have seen it since I was young.
An adult.
Yes. And so watching it, especially after, we'll have another episode about that crazy documentary.
Oh,
okay.
Goodness, yes.
Okay, the Catfish High School thing. But watching it again made me appreciate the filmmaking, made me appreciate Brian De Palma and the camera work and the storytelling, especially since it's not that long, and it really does invite you into the characters and into the feelings and into the dynamics. It also made me realize, as I told Christine, that the dress that Carrie makes for herself to wear to the prom is, in fact, Gwyneth Paltrow's Oscar dress that Ralph Lauren made for the Shakespeare in Love acceptance speech. I never put those two things together, but when I saw Sissy in that dress, the pink slip dress,
spaghetti straps,
with the shawl, I said, Gwyneth ripped off Carrie. Okay. So for those of you who don't remember, haven't seen Carrie, Carrie is a miserable, isolated teenager who, in the first scene of the movie, gets her period in the gym
It's awful.
in front of all the other girls and has no idea what is happening to her body. And freaks out, and the girls torment her.
Start throwing tampons at her, abusing her.
They're terrible to her anyway, but this is a moment where they can really capitalize on bullying her. She has a crazy mother,
super religious,
who is really religious and convinced that everything is demonic, and that now that she's a woman, she's going to be she's going to burn in hell, and she just needs to pray. And her mother is physically and emotionally abusive towards her, and Carrie is basically forced to walk around in a sack for most of this film, not talk to anyone. She has a PE teacher that's sympathetic to her and that tries to console her, but she really is just alone in the world. To complicate things, she also has these powers, telekinetic powers, where she can move stuff around and she can command objects to do what she wants, and doors shut, and eventually very terrible things will happen. So Carrie, throughout the film, is confronted by her peers who continue to bully her, and then is invited, we don't know whether or not as a joke or for real, to go to the prom with basically the jock, the homecoming king, this nice guy.
Although it does seem to be the case that his girlfriend, the Amy Irving character, is trying to be kind to Carrie in doing
It
this.
seems that way. Although there's always the possibility that she is in on what will be a terrible, terrible prank to humiliate Carrie in front of everybody. So Carrie goes to the prom, and as most people have probably seen this scene, she goes, she's elated, she's
Dream come true.
Everything's amazing. This boy is so nice to her. She has her first kiss. They dance. She is voted in as
Homecoming queen.
prom queen
Yeah.
or whatever, and she gets up on the stage and she's just in a complete state of ecstasy. Okay, and then we see this terrible thing happen to her, famously, where pig's blood is dumped on her by these very cruel teenagers who are angry at her and feel
Just
like
assholes.
they're just
Including John Travolta.
including a John Travolta. And Amy Irving is stunned, actually. This is when we find out, she wasn't in on it. And the boyfriend gets kind of conked out by the bucket that dropped the pig's blood. And she loses her shit, Carrie. Okay? The doors are locked. The things start to fly around. People get impaled. People get electrocuted. And basically the entire gym burns and is set on fire, and there are only, I guess, 3 survivors: Amy Irving, John Travolta, and
Nancy Allen.
The
2 evil teenagers.
The 2 evil teenagers. And
Even the kindly teacher, Betty Butler's character, is killed in the gym.
Yes, she is impaled by a piece of wood. So Carrie goes home, and she washes off all the blood, and her mother starts to console her, but then we see a knife going towards Carrie's back, because her mother's like, well, I just have to end your life before you invite more spicin in. And then we see Carrie, running down the stairs, and in the end, she takes her powers to get 5 or 6 knives into her mother, and then the entire house just starts to fall apart and move into the ground, and everyone dies. So everyone dies,
including Nancy Allen and John Travolta.
Including Nancy Allen and John Travolta. And basically the only survivor of all of this, it seems like, is Amy Irving. And Sissy Spacek, of course, is a goner. And that's Carrie for you.
Although we also do, I have to add, we have the very famous sort of jump scare at the end, where Amy Irving approaches Carrie's grave.
Yes.
And Carrie's hand reaches up from the grave, which then turns out is just a dream. Or is it just a dream?
Right.
So it's a So it's another downer, basically. It's another downer.
Oh, it's a downer.
It's a downer. It's so sad.
It is sad. And it's bullying on a number of levels. She's bullied by her mother. She's bullied by her classmates. And then she also is misunderstood in terms of the telekinesis as well. So she doesn't understand herself, in addition to other people just making her feel like complete shit. And there's not a whole lot of redemption in Carrie. It's just, she dies with everyone else, I guess allegedly because she has killed all these people, and there's nowhere for her to go. And Stephen King based the original in Maine, but the film does not take place in Maine, or there are no signifiers of Maine, and it doesn't look anything like Maine. Looks like California, which is where it was filmed, in Culver City. So I think a question for me to ask for you is, what is Maine about Carrie? And what is Maine about Stephen King more broadly?
Oh, goodness. I mean, one of the things that I think, and I don't know if everyone from Maine would agree with me, but it really is true to me that Maine has a particular darkness that relates to, I mean, really simply, the Puritan founding in the early 17th century. I as crazy as it sounds, I think that a lot of that sort of almost like Nathaniel Hawthorne kind of DNA, not that he himself was a Puritan, of course, but he's someone who looked back on the Puritan history of New England and made those kinds of observations, right? That this obsession with evil, with Providence, all of the, and Providence, the thing, not Providence, the city.
Right.
That it sort of infused New England with that DNA. And so I think that is really true. And I mean, my hometown of Portland was founded in 1632. And certainly my family has been there since the 1630s. And there really is this feeling of darkness, that this kind of good versus evil kind of Manichaean model has always been at play there in sort of the, I mean, if you look at like the woods, right? I mean, all of the, and I know it sounds really, really strange, but then on top of that, there's a much more realistic vibe that I think you get with Stephen King generally, that you see in Carrie, and that is absolutely the state of Maine. And that is a very particular kind of poverty, right? Rural poverty, people who are out in the woods, people without a lot of resources, junkyards. You know, again, if you drive through rural Maine, right, this is absolutely what you see. And things that are just, obviously, it's different, say, from the rural landscape that we might experience here where we live, in lots of different ways.
I'm now wondering if Christine has anything to do with your name.
Well, that's one of the many reasons why I don't like thinking and talking about Stephen King, because it was exactly that came out. Christine came out exactly at the point where I was in high school. I had certainly read a lot of Stephen King at that point. Dating from maybe 5th grade, which is a terrible idea. But so I also think then there's this really realistic component to so much of what Stephen King writes. And again, you do see that in Carrie, right? So you have the mother who is obsessed with Satan, right? With good and evil, with demonic, sort of the difference between demonic powers, and understands Carrie's powers to be that way. But then you also do have the sense of like, this is a poor family. Right? An isolated family.
Right.
And so I think that you do have at one and the same time, you have this weird sort of metaphysical sense of darkness and that kind of battle between good and evil. But then you also have this reality that it is a state full of very, very poor people who have been very poor for a long time, with this physical isolation, right? All of the woods. And that's the thing that I think, certainly when I talk to people who are not from Maine, they of course tend to think of like, oh, everyone's on the seacoast with lobsters, right? Like we were just talking about within the bedroom. But of course, most of the state is not like that, right? It's the Carrie landscape.
And the interesting thing too, again, going back to Carrie's high school, is even set in California, but they're replicating the book, and that you do get a sense of there are some families, Amy Irving's family, that may be kind of middle class and presented that way, but there are other families that are not, and that even the teachers are kind of these working class figures, and that there are different kinds of students, and even just kind of driving around or to the parking lots, it's definitely not a vision of affluence. And that Carrie's poverty isn't the reason that people are making fun of her.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And even that interesting scene where Carrie goes to, like, I guess, the general store, which goes to buy the makeup, right? And she tries on all those lipsticks, and people are kind of looking at her. But you see the way that drugstore, not only is it set in the 70s and very 70s looking, but it also looks kind of off, and it looks like, again, we don't get a sense that these people are shopping in the mall or doing anything like that. That it's very mom and pop, local, kind of who you know, kids walking around. It doesn't have the Fast Times at Ridgemont High vibes. And even though it's maybe set in the same place or a place like it.
But I think that's, and it's interesting you say that because what we're not seeing, right, is this John Hughes style.
No.
There's the Richies and then basically like, some poor, Andy character from Pretty Pink or whatever. But I also think, one thing that is so kind of resonant to me is, so when I was growing up in the 70s, I mean, it was a huge deal for my relatives who lived further to the north in Clinton, which is around Waterville. It was a huge deal for them to come down to Portland or South Portland, technically, to go to the Maine Mall. Right, that was a thing. I mean, there was a mall in Bangor at some point. which is where Stephen King lives, in
Right,
Bangor,
right,
Maine.
right.
And so at some point there was a mall there, but the main mall down in southern Maine was the thing, right? It was a trip to go. It was a big deal to go. And, of course, it was a mall like any other mall. But that was an event, right? Most people in Maine weren't living in a place where they could go to the mall.
Right.
And, it might be different now for all I know, but that absolutely tracks, right? Was sort of when
Right.
Carrie was published in the early 1970s.
Right. So I think that in some ways satisfied or scratched my Stephen King itch. Although, again, I, like you, if you grew up when we did, I read the Stephen King books, I watched the Stephen King movies, and it was Cujo and Pet Sematary, and again, all of it, and found it much scarier than I generally do now. But I think Stephen King is somebody who has lived in our imagination for a long time, that association with Maine. And that's, can we think of creepy, isolated woods, maybe a rabid dog, maybe
an old hotel,
maybe something coming back to life, things like that.
Well, and I mean, I think I told you this before, but I also want to say it for our 10 listeners. I mean, it absolutely is the case, and maybe this is true for other places. He is so insistent about localizing the works in a way that I think a lot of Maine people are like, oh, this is so fantastic, right? We're seeing all this wonderful stuff that is familiar to us. But that, in my case at least, I find to be really terrifying. And I think I mentioned to you the one example is that in The Dead Zone, which actually I really liked as a book. I think The Dead Zone is a great book.
Right.
Then later made into a film with Christopher Walken, right, as the main character, John Smith. And there's a scene in The Dead Zone where Johnny and his father go to a very familiar restaurant in Gray, Maine, Cole's Farm. And it was a terrifying scene to me because they're in the waiting room and Johnny is thumbing through all the coats in the coat rack and he is seeing the futures of every single person who owns these coats. Some of them dying in these terrible ways. And it's this sort of little model of how his psychic powers, right, are manifesting in that way. And I think you have to humor me with one more story about Stephen King.
Yeah.
Actually, two more. Two more stories about Stephen King.
You go.
I could go on forever.
You go on, Stephen King. Again, you said this wasn't going to be a Stephen King episode, so now it is.
But I can't help it. Again, trying to explain further why I cannot consume the media. So, did you ever see the David Soul television version of Salem's Lot that came out in the 1970s?
I do not believe that I have.
Sweet Lord Jesus. I mean, it's one of the scariest things ever. So it was a mini-series. I think it probably came out, 1978, 1979. It was a mini-series. It was a huge hit. Sort of a multi-night show. David Soul plays the main character. A town in Maine, which is then overrun by vampires. Again, absolutely terrifying. He has a young boy, like a 15-year-old, who is kind of helping him to track down and kill the vampire. And there's a terrible, terrible but famous scene where a young boy who is turned into a vampire. Are you familiar?
Oh yes,
with the Danny Glick scene.
The news. There was a newer Salem Lot that just
is Rob Lowe in it or something
on like HBO.
Okay.
And I actually watched that.
Oh, okay.
So I'm familiar with. I've actually saw it fairly recently. The newer Salem's Lot.
Well, the Danny Glick scene burned itself into the brain of every single person I think my age. And where he's sort of scratching at the windows and he's begging his childhood friend to let him in, obviously to turn him into a vampire.
Right.
But the story part of this is that when it was originally broadcast, we were visiting my Aunt Rachel in Clinton, Maine, which is Boondock, Maine.
Right.
I was not allowed to watch Salem's Lot because I was too young, which was a sensible decision on the part of my mother. But I was upstairs and I could hear everything. So I'm by myself in this bedroom, totally isolated Maine location, woods across the street, looking around in this dark room, and I can hear...
It's replicating the scene.
Yes, and I can hear from downstairs the whole Danny Glick scratching on the window saying, "Let me in, Johnny," or whatever his name is.
Right.
And I have consumed a lot of Stephen King media since then. But it was absolutely terrifying.
So my parallel to that which has nothing to do with Stephen King, but it is about life and art. So my bedroom was set up in the exact same way as the Poltergeist bedroom.
Oh,
there was a tree outside the window. There was a clown doll on a chair, and there was a closet in exactly the place of that room, and twin beds, the whole story of it. Okay, now, and of course I didn't have a sibling in the room with me. My brother had his own room, and he and I are, you know, almost 10 years apart. So anyway, I was alone, and unfortunately, as happened in the 70s a lot, or 80s, or whenever that movie came out, somebody thought it was a good idea to show that movie to a bunch of 9 or 10-year-olds, okay, at a sleepover, right? And for the entire summer, my mother had to sleep in the room with me because I was too scared to sleep, to just even close my eyes, because I was going to be sucked into the closet, because the tree was going to come in. I mean, I
can't imagine thunderstorms. What did you do when there were thunderstorms?
It was just absolutely terrifying, and the verisimilitude of the Poltergeist movie and my room, and again, I put the clown away. All of it, but it was still like I couldn't change the situation of my room. And then I was like, well, maybe if we move the beds, it didn't matter. It really just didn't matter. So these movies from that era, I mean, they really struck a chord.
And merciless. They were merciless.
Yes, and I think that whoever made them knew that many of us were going to watch them inappropriately when we were too young at sleepovers or in whatever, or we're going to hear them, right?
Yes. I cannot stress to you how terrifying. And actually, maybe a couple of years ago, I'm like, I'm going to watch that scene again. I'm just going to find it on YouTube. And what was funny about it is that when I watched it again, I'm like, immediately, I was like, I wish I had not watched that. It was just so terrifying.
So terrifying.
And I later read the book, Salem's Lot. And in the book, one of the guys who becomes a vampire, when he's bitten, he goes to a McDonald's on Route 1 in Falmouth, Maine. Then he goes home and becomes a vampire. And of course, that McDonald's, right, super familiar, Route 1 in Falmouth.
Sure.
But the last Stephen King story I'm going to tell. I have one more. Can you indulge me?
I feel like we're sitting. It's starting to creep me out. Even this conversation.
Okay. And again, I could say more creepy stuff, but I'm just going to restrict myself to this.
Okay.
That when David Cronenberg's The Fly, with Jeff Goldblum, when that came out in the late 80s, whenever it was, and I went to go see it at the Maine Mall Cinema next to the Maine Mall. And Stephen King and his entire family, they were at the showing that I was at. And I didn't even recognize him, but the friend that I was with, he had gone to camp with Joe King, one of Stephen King's sons. Oh. And so we're walking out, and he's like, oh, there's Joe King. Oh, there's Stephen King. And because there were 2 hotels right next to the movie theater across the street from the Maine Mall, and Stephen King and his family walked over to the hotel. They clearly had come down to Portland to go to the Maine Mall, as people do, as I just said. So so
that is quite a celeb sighting for you.
Apparently it was. But it made sense that it was The Fly, right? That it was a horror movie.
Yes, that makes complete sense that he would go and see that. Yeah. Okay. So our other text that you recommended was a text that my mother also recommended, not having to do with Maine, but just having to do with the pod. So shout out to my mom. Called A Summer Place. And A Summer Place, which is actually referenced in the lyrics of the Grease song, Look at Me.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
As for you, Troy Donahue.
As for you, Troy Donahue. So that's kind of how I knew of it, but I had never seen it before. But it does take place in Maine, and as you say, very much encapsulates both the Maine resort vibe as well as all the class issues that are reflected in our other texts.
Yes, absolutely. And what I think is also really nice about A Summer Place in terms of our pod is that it is yet another instance that films from 60 years ago might be interested in things that we might not expect them to be talking about, because A Summer Place is almost entirely about sex. In addition to class and the state of Maine. It is about, we have a family that is living in a large house now turned in. in a place called Pine Island off the coast of Maine.
Not Pine Island, South Carolina.
And not Camp Pinewood, which is actually the camp in Wet Hot American Summer, if we have a chance to talk about that. But anyway.
And not Camp Pine Forest, which was another camp that was in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. So there are a lot of pine-related sleepover camps and things
and you know, Maine is the pine tree state. That is our official nickname. The Pine Tree State. It's not Vacation Land. It is. Okay. Wait, what was the name of the camp that you went to in Maine?
Tepawingo.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, to get back to a summer place, and so we have a sort of wealthy family that has now fallen on hard times. The beautiful old house has now turned into an inn for vacationers, and we have an unhappily married couple, Bart, the rich guy who's now turned poor guy, who's an alcoholic. He has a wife. They have a teenage son. The incredibly handsome Troy Donahue, who looks fantastic in this film. And as I wrote to you before, the clothes that Troy Donahue is wearing, so modern, he could wear every single one of those outfits today. And look, it's like Ralph Lauren designed it before the time, really basically.
Is. Yes.
And so, but we have very much this kind of parallelism, because the idea is that another family is coming to stay with them. A man, Ken, who used to be a lifeguard at the property 20 years before.
And everyone knew it.
And everybody knew, and he was poor, again, working class, who now is rich. He is there with his kind of bitchy, terrible, awful wife, Helen. She is super bitchy.
She is horrible.
Yeah. And she is horrible. And we can talk about that in a second. And their own teenage child, Molly, played by Sandra Dee. And so we have absolutely this parallelism that rich Bart is now poor Ken is now rich, and they are all going to spend the summer together because Ken and his family are coming as paying guests.
But there's also tension because the wife of Ken,
Sylvia,
had a fling many years ago with what's his name? Ken.
Ken.
The rich guy.
Richard Egan's character, who's also quite handsome.
He is
Richard
handsome.
Egan was a very handsome man.
The lifeguard turned millionaire.
Yes.
Okay. They had this flaming hot passion, which they
and clearly they had done it.
Of course.
And they had done it.
They had not been able to resist.
Yes.
Okay. So they had sex but moved on because of class differences.
He was not wealthy enough for her parents.
Right, but they're still thinking about each other.
Still madly in love.
Neither one has ever found anyone to equal that love.
Miserable marriages.
Right.
And they have always... Now, they haven't been in contact in the intervening 20 years, right? No letters, no phone calls, no visits. This is the first time they are seeing each other since that 20-year-old breakup.
Right. So the rich family comes and chaos ensues, or drama ensues, rather.
Drama ensues. A lot of sex drama.
A lot of sex drama.
The
young people immediately connect, and Sandra Dee and Troy Donahue are smitten, but they're holding hands, they're not holding hands,
they're not kissing.
And bitch mom,
who's a lot like Carrie's mom.
Helen is bitch mom continues to bully her daughter into being chaste, into not talking about her body, into
wants to wrap her down with a super tight bra,
like put her in a chastity belt, and put her. I mean, she really wants to lock her in the closet in the way that Carrie's mom
very much so
does, she wants her to deny any kind of sexual feelings, and tells her she's going to be a total slut if she doesn't pull it together. And her father, Sandra Dee's father, is sort of like, well,
young people have passions. Life is life.
And I've always had passions, and she should just do as I do. And so there's rifts between the couple over their daughter's sexuality, as well as between Sandra Dee and Troy Donahue, who are constantly, should we not? How close should we stand? Or people are looking at us.
And then we also have tension between Bart and Sylvia.
Right.
Troy's parents, because Bart is an alcoholic. Sylvia is trying to keep this business and family together.
But she can't help her love
she cannot help her love for Richard Egan.
No. She just tells him, I'm going to leave my husband, and be with you, and what do you think? And if we can keep the kids, let's just do it.
Great.
Let's
because
do
they
it.
do start an affair.
They do.
They start when they are all in Maine together.
And that's like from the jump.
From the jump. From the jump. It's like he goes and changes the light bulb up in the attic or something.
Yeah.
And she has this kind of matronly aunt who's like, go for it.
Right.
Your husband's a dud. He's an alcoholic fool.
This guy's rich.
This guy's rich. He's Richard Egan and looks incredible. So just go ahead and have the affair. So, but I will say something that I do find really kind of disturbing about this film, which again is so frank about sex, but we do have, and I don't know if you agree with me, we have a couple of really creepy, gross conversations between the Sandra Dee character and her father. Where almost at the very beginning, when we first are introduced to them, she says something to her father, like, oh, I don't, when I have naughty dreams at night, and I'm like, this is gross. Right. They have the whole argument our discussion about her getting a bra, like a better bra, because her mom wants to lock her down, and we have the whole, like, well, mom says I bounce when I walk. She's having this conversation with her father. Okay. I find, and again, then they have the whole sort of like lying in bed discussion about healthy sexuality, and I just found that to be kind of gross.
But it's also in a lot of ways surprising, because we do expect in that 50s model, right, the father knows best, and the separation of gender roles, and a mom who's going to educate her daughter on the birds and the bees, and the father's out at work. And this film really shows, in a lot of ways, a reversal of that.
Yes.
A mother repressing sexuality, not providing very much help. I mean, really just tormenting her daughter for just becoming a woman, essentially. And then her father being much more supportive, even though he does eventually marry Sylvia, and that's kind of
we can talk
kind of questionable. But he acts in a kind of he's like to hell with it. We only live YOLO, and she's kind of the same way. And what that does to the kids. Again, we can talk about that. But it is a 50s movie that has a male fatherly lead who is taking on that nurturing role.
And you're absolutely right, and I think that is so interesting. But it's also made very clear, right, that he himself is someone who has been completely sexually deprived in his own marriage. Right. They sleep in separate bedrooms. Yes. We are told immediately when they arrive at the inn, Helen says, Molly and I will sleep here, you'll sleep over there. That it has been like beyond dead bedroom. And that, in effect, Helen is herself, right, to use a very 1950s word, frigid. Right. And that it's not just that she's concerned about Molly because Molly is unmarried, because Molly is a teenager, but that her rejection of sexuality, right, even encompasses her own long-term marriage. Yes. And so, yes, it's not just that she's not going to get any kind of positive information, but there's a sense of active discouragement, right, of any kind of healthy sexuality, even within a marital context.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So, as this film unfolds, Troy Donahue and Sandra Dee go on a boating outing that turns awry.
There's a storm.
And they have to spend the night together on some sort of island, and no one knows where they are. And
it's not, however, the Blue Lagoon Island.
It is
not
the Blue Lagoon.
They don't immediately strip down.
We don't, and again, we have no sense of any improprieties that may have occurred in between them. However, when people find them in the morning, everyone freaks out and starts to think these two slept together, and we need to separate them, and this is going to be all over the news. But we also have the coming together of the other two couples who reveal to their spouses that they are going to divorce. We have Sylvia and we have Helen that are, or Ken rather, saying bye.
Because Helen has already caught on to the affair.
Yes, Helen has caught on
because
to the affair.
The night watchman or whatever, the only person in the film who has a Maine accent, by the way. Just as in the bedroom, there's like one person with a Maine accent. But anyway. And so she has already found out about it. She is just waiting to kind of catch them in the act. But, of course, what we also have after that night is that we have the super disturbing fact that Molly has to submit to a forced abusive virginity test, where her mother has called a
search.
Yes, has called a doctor to make sure that she is still a virgin, presumably through a pelvic exam, although who knows, which is just so gross and disgusting.
So gross.
And Molly runs away briefly as a result of this.
Right.
And yes, and everything blows up. And so then we do embark upon this really, again, interesting for a movie, and from 1959, that we have not only the two divorces of the couples, but then the Richard Egan character and Sylvia, they do get married.
Yep.
Right? So he marries his mistress. Who knew?
Right.
Apparently
we have remarried people who were having an affair, who get a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house.
It's a very... Which apparently really is a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house in California. But anyway.
I am going for it.
It looked very nice.
And they invite their children who have been away at different boarding schools, single-sex boarding schools in New England, to come and stay with them. So we have and Molly and... What is Troy Donahue's character's name again?
Johnny
Molly and Johnny have been writing letters, and they are
phone calls
still
occasionally.
in love,
yes.
But there's a huge problem because can they be together? We have the issue of Helen.
Helen is still, you can't see him, you can't write to him.
Plus, there's the whole, again, dynamics of marrying your stepbrother, stepsister, which is very OC. Very Blake Lively and Penn, right?
That is,
so we have again, Gossip Girl, not OC.
Yeah. Gossip Girl. Girl.
So we have this issue of, do you want to date your stepbrother?
which is not an issue at all in the film.
No.
Nobody ever addresses this.
No. And the parents don't say they shouldn't see each other because now they're kind of related.
They don't say it at all. No. And they, of course, don't have sex until they are stepbrother and stepsister. Right? When they both go back to the new parental Frank Lloyd Wright home, that is when they first have sex.
Right. So they have sex, and as much as they try not to, they give in to temptation, and Molly becomes pregnant.
Very first time.
Shocker. And they don't know what to do, and they can't get married without some parental consent because they're underage. And they, for some reason that is unclear to me, don't think to ask their rather libertine parents to help them until the very end. They go to drunken Ken. They try to get married on their own. Like
when they are turned away.
They're turned away. And then finally, after they're like living under a bridge and at the end of their rope, they go back to Sylvia and Ken and
are welcomed with open
they're like,
arms.
oh great, there's gonna be a baby, and you'll love each other, and let's all live together.
You're my grandmother times 2. Anyway, my grandmother and my step-grandmother.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I spent too much
time. It's like Chinatown, right?
It is like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's Chinatown.
All these references coming up. So in the end, we have 2 divorces, an illegitimate child,
stepbrother and stepsister getting married.
Who do get married.
And
then vacation in Maine.
And everybody's happy. It's a happy ending.
It is a happy ending.
Now, we have no idea what has happened to Helen.
No.
Right? No clue. What happens to Bart? He's
Bart
still
joins
drinking.
the Coast Guard. Or some kind of naval
thing.
He has
wearing
that
his
uniform.
But he's still like a drunk. It's not like
he's a lush.
It's not like he's sobered up.
Well, he also got some kind of ulcer. So he may not be well.
That's. I mean, he probably has liver problems.
Yes,
at this point.
He probably does. But at the very end of this film, at least our young lovebirds are happy.
Yes,
and they're gonna go on their Maine vacay and Pine Island, and
maybe they'll restore the fortunes of the inn.
And everyone's rich.
And
that's
everyone's
the other
rich.
thing.
And everyone is rich
because we now have rich Ken, right? Who's going to support them. And they can restore the inn.
I just like to think
they can just do whatever.
Yeah.
Open a lobster shop.
And everything's great. And they need to fire the night watchman who kept telling on them and stuff.
For real.
So get rid of him and find someone else who does have a Maine accent. So that I think that what I kept thinking of in watching this film, in addition to thinking of Grease, which I did think of course, often, as you mentioned.
Right.
But I kept thinking about Peyton Place. Now, we have not watched Peyton Place as part of the pod, but I think I've told you I watched Peyton Place so many times as a kid. Yet another inappropriate film that my mother allowed me to watch.
You were allowed to watch everything.
I know. Well, she just wasn't paying attention. And so that's the explanation for that. But of course, in Peyton Place, we do have, we have stepfather assaults, and we have pregnancy, and we have murder, right? All of this very sort of soap opera stuff. And in some ways, A Summer Place seems downright restrained compared to Peyton Place. But of course, we do have, again, a 1959 movie that is so different in terms of its treatment of sexuality.
It is, and apparently quite shocking at the time.
Quite shocking at the time. And as I understand it, right, well, certainly Sandra Dee was a teenager when this was made, and that this was the big selling point. And it's interesting to think of A Summer Place as a teen film.
Yes.
Right, but my understanding is that it was very much marketed that way, right? Like, she's a young teen star, right? And there, Troy O'Donoghue, again, he's so appealing. And it's interesting to think of it as something comparable to, I don't know, The Breakfast Club or whatever. But
it's really about it is about them, but it is equally about the parents. And in that way, again, going to the OC Gossip Girl model, which maybe came from Summer Place, right?
Absolutely.
Where you have adults behaving badly, as well as teenagers in states of questioning and romance and separation and coming back together. There is that model in A Summer Place.
Yes. And I absolutely think that the older couples' stories, it's like a million times more compelling than Sandra Dee and Troy Donahue.
Sure. Well, their story is, should they have sex or not? We love each other. Should we? Okay, we do. Now I'm pregnant.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, that's...
And this whole, kind of heavy petting, oh, Johnny, this isn't right, whatever, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, no. They're a snooze fest. The adults are really, really interesting. And they're much more layered. And again, even Bitchola Helen is interesting because she's somebody who is very frank about not being sexually satisfied, but also isn't going out to get any.
And we don't know why
Right.
she's coming from this perspective
Right.
of not wanting to have any kind of sexual relationship with her husband.
Her
and husband? Yeah, Richard Egan looks
hot.
Incredible.
He looks hot.
I actually looked it up. Richard Egan seriously is 38 in that film. I'm not kidding. Which is, of course, so hilarious. But anyway, so he looks amazing. I would say, Sylvia, Dorothy McGuire, she looks incredible.
She does.
She looks very 1950s housewife, but she looks beautiful.
But she does look beautiful. She does look beautiful.
So I think that it is. So we do have this whole, not a lot of questioning, should we have the affair, right? They go to it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But there is this struggle about divorce, which I think is fascinating because, as you mentioned before, when they are thinking, how can we be together, the main question is custody of their children.
Right.
Will Bart let me have my son? Will Helen let me have my daughter? And the idea that this is the practical issue, right? That they want to create this kind of family.
Right.
But what will the reaction be of their spouses? And of course, Bart does say, even after he knows about the affair, he says to Sylvia, all is forgiven, but you just have to come back to me. And she's like, fuck that, basically. I'm never coming back to you.
Right.
You're blah. Anyway.
Right.
So it is, I do wonder, and of course, your mom could tell us about this. I do wonder, how is it, not just in terms of the sexuality, but the idea that we are presented with this frank conversation about divorce.
Yes.
About divorce and custody, and again, nobody's sorry for the affair. They're not apologizing for the affair, right? They're just like...
And of course, very, very different than the women.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to go back to one of our earlier pods where divorce is a big deal. And this is, again, we're having an affair. Now we're going to get a divorce, and so are you, and we're okay with that. And then, what do you know? We got married.
We got married. But of course, we do have the explanation / apology that they fell in love when they were teenagers, right? Much like Forever.
Right.
And they are wrenched apart, but not wrenched apart.
No, he just wasn't rich enough.
He wasn't rich enough. And so we have the sense that there's family pressure on Sylvia to let him go, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we also have where he says, I vowed I would never come back until I was super rich. He gets super rich. And so we really do come back, as in so much of this other stuff, to that question of class, right? Not only that they're sort of flipped, but that, as you mentioned before, everybody still remembers him, right at the
Everybody.
inn.
You
but
were
they're
the
like, you're the
lifeguard.
lifeguard. You're the lifeguard. And basically he's like, well, I'm a rich guy now. And so I think that tracks so interesting. So
it does.
We don't have, maybe before we move on a little bit, so in terms of Maine, right, we do have this kind of coastal beauty, people from different classes, class conflict, but we don't have this sense that the Maine coast is like Rio, right? There are other beaches where it's like...
It is not an exotic place.
It is not an exotic
place.
place.
It is a familiar place, and a place where you can be enticed to do things that you might not normally do, if not in Maine. Blame it on Maine.
Blame it on Maine. But it's also, of course, that the water is so much colder. And the coast is so much rockier.
And being topless in Maine...
No, I do not recommend that.
Isn't going to work.
Not recommend. Even in southern Maine.
No.
Not to speak of down east northern Maine. Okay, so let's see. What else did we talk about for this, or think about for this week? I watched Wet Hot American Summer.
As did I.
And so I have to ask, did that then evoke in you memories of your own going to camp experience in Maine?
No.
Okay.
It did not.
Say more, Lauren. Say more.
It did not. First of all, there are so many things about that movie that are wrong, that are just flat out wrong. There are some things that are really funny, just ridiculously funny, but there are so many things that are just wrong.
Do you mean the people ending up with like children or like making out with children?
Okay, I won't even go to the Molly Shannon place.
The Molly Shannon thing, yes.
But the idea that a bunch of Jewish losers are going to this summer camp in Maine was not my memory of my Jewish camp in Maine.
Okay.
And part of that is the issue of class. Okay.
Let's hear it.
So if you are going to summer camp in Maine, or any of New England, because I only went to Tapawingo for one summer, and my other camp, Woodmere, was in upstate New York.
Okay.
But if you can afford to send your kid to camp in Maine for 8 weeks, okay, which presumably these people have been there for that long, I was there for that long, you are not somebody who's kind of scraping by, and I mean, again, the kind of affluence to go to camp in Maine was not represented in Wet Hot American Summer, okay? Even in the 70s. They're not wearing uniforms as we did, okay? They're like, I don't know, like just kind of rando counselors that are making out with each other, that are not supervising the kids, and that haven't been trained. Again, I understand that's part of the satire of it.
Yeah,
and that
they're all fuck-ups.
The show is supposed to be a satire, but it rubbed me the wrong way. The best part of that movie was when they go into town and go to the crack
into Waterville
and get,
which I mentioned earlier.
That is
they go
the
into Waterville.
best scene of the movie. Is like the off day, because that is really what we envisioned our counselors doing, was like going to crack dens, right?
Well, and of course in the film it's only supposed to take like a half hour, right? They're doing all of these things and it was like a half hour.
That is the funniest part. The rest of that film I probably could have done without. And most of it, I just was like, can we get through this? Can we fast forward through this? The David Hyde Pierce, like, I mean, just all of it.
You didn't like it when he got tenure at the end of the
No, he didn't get tenure.
He got the Nobel
Prize,
the physics
and he
award.
got to work in, like, NASA or something.
Yes.
We don't even know if he got tenure.
That's true.
And
But I love that he was so absolutely sensitive about the fact that he was an associate professor.
He was an associate professor, but the rest of it just was really hard to take. And again, I like Friday the 13th. I mean, in terms of that genre and camp movies and things like that, all of it. But this just was wrong on so many levels. Although it really does just bring the question of Bradley Cooper's sexuality.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're just like, how are people not talking about this more? It's not like a Tom Cruise low situation, right? It's like, what?
Yeah. He's doing a lot of making out with Michael Ian Black. And again, yes. Well, this is, of course, I mean, for people who haven't seen it, right? Everybody is in this movie.
Everybody.
Everybody is in this movie.
The
Amy
entire
Poehler,
cast of SNL
again,
from like
Janine Garofalo, right, as you said, David Hyde Pierce, right, Paul Rudd,
Yes.
Elizabeth Banks, basically
Yes.
everybody who's in the last, I was always going to say Last American Virgin, 40-Year-Old Virgin, tons of people in it.
Tons.
And actually one thing that was coincidental is when I watched it on the same day, again, coincidentally, that Michael Showalter, his episode of Sex and the City, where he is Billy, the friend of Bertha,
Yes.
right, that Carrie
Yes.
Yells at, who plays Coop in
Right.
Wet Hot American Summer, and it was just a total coincidence. Same day. Sex and the
I
City
knew
always
I knew there was a connect, and
Yes,
I was sort
always.
of like, that guy. It kind of looks like Adam Scott,
Yes,
but it's
yeah, he does
not
look like
Adam Scott. But it's not Adam Scott.
Billy, when they go to bed. When they go to bed.
When they go to bed,
Yes,
and
the
she tells the
Post-it.
story of the Post-it.
Yes. And it was so funny because I was like, oh my God, I just saw him.
Oh,
And so
man.
I think, the Bradley Cooper, because Bradley Cooper looks great in this movie.
He does look great.
He looks great.
He always looks
And
great.
He does always look great. But
From my hometown, from
From
Abington,
your-
Pennsylvania.
from-
So if we're going, making some bridges
Uh-huh.
here between the two towns.
Yes. Excellent point. Well, my understanding is that, what was it? Whoever wrote it might have been Michael Showalter or someone else. Whoever wrote it actually had gone to a Jewish sleepover camp in Maine, and that it was based on his experiences.
Well, I don't know
but
which one they went to,
Yes,
but
it is but combined with movies like Meatballs and Little
Sure,
Darlings and stuff, right?
sure.
That sort of late 1970s, early 1980s. I will say I loved the soundtrack. All the Loverboy.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed
Yeah.
that. I thought that when Christopher Maloney starts talking to the can of vegetables, I
guess-
was like, it's so
I just couldn't get on board with it. I think I was just, again, there was so much of it that I'm just like, this is a satire, but it was also made, in the early aughts, and I'm just kind of this seems too late to make this satire.
Yeah.
It just didn't have the same feeling for me as like, those satires of the, I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Yeah.
Those were resonant.
Or
and
like The
funny.
Naked Gun.
Or like The Naked Gun. Right. It doesn't feel like that to me. It feels
I
just
agree.
like
Yes.
all over the place, and some of the ideas are funny, but not really well executed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, even when Molly Shannon like hooks up with that kid,
Oh.
I mean, you just like, come on now.
And then we have the other counselor who's making out with the other kid, which to me is like so disturbing.
So disturbing.
When
she-
the guy has like come back,
Right,
to
right.
hook up with this girl, and she's with one of the campers, and not like a teenage camper,
No.
right? Like a kid who looks like he's
No.
like 11 or 12 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really, really gross. I really could have like done
Now
without
the
that.
best part about that movie for me and for Jim, by the way, were the sheets.
sheets?
On the bunks. The
Okay, I missed it
rainbow
entirely.
sheets.
I missed
the
it.
bedding. The
Okay.
bedding is so on spot because that actual bedding was in
Oh!
our houses. Okay.
Okay.
Those comforters, those sheets,
Uh-huh.
the decor of it
Uh-huh.
really was spot on.
Okay.
And there are a lot of details like that I think were great, but sacrificed in terms of the larger, I don't know, script or the satire or just being funny. Again, a lot of it, like this scene with the sweater and the flannel and
I actually thought that was funny. Because I realized I only laughed like maybe in the last like 20 minutes of the film, half hour. But I thought that was funny just because.
Did you laugh at the guy from the Catskills?
No, but I thought that it was actually a good sort of meta joke to have the joke being that they are laughing at the guy from the Catskills, right? So I thought and that's Michael Showalter, the guy from the Catskills. Like he's playing that guy.
Yeah, I guess.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like, again, not funny to me.
I mostly agree with you. I think the person who to me came out the best was actually Christopher Maloney, but only because it's so unusual to see him in a comic role.
And in a crop top.
And in a crop top. See, okay, I know why you didn't like it. You didn't like it because it made fun of training montages that end in a freeze frame with arms lifted up.
And actually that part I said, here's the connect, right? Here's the connect between our movies.
Yes.
Is that there's a training montage, and then these two guys in crop tops, and tiny little shorts, and they're bonding, and I love that. I love that part of it. I think again, seeing Christopher Maloney in a crop top, it was reminding me back to Sex and the City. In a recent episode that I watched, where Charlotte goes to a sex shop and is wearing a crop top.
Okay, I don't remember.
You never see Charlotte in a crop top. And I sort of felt the same way when I saw Christopher Maloney. Because I'm just so used to him in his, like, SVU, situation.
Shirt and tie, outfit. Or like in Oz, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, anyway. Those things, yeah.
Looking hardcore.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that part of it. But it really does seem like a film that came together because a bunch of comics were getting really hammered, right?
Sure.
They're smoking dope.
Sure.
And they're just like, let's do these little set pieces. And all of our friends, will ask them to come in. But, seriously, the worst part was the Molly Shannon part. Just absolutely, I just really wish any... Like, when the kid starts giving her a massage, and I'm like, where is this going? But then when she actually, says we're getting married, next week. Anyway.
And everyone is okay with it.
Everyone is okay with it. But, it was filmed in Pennsylvania. It was not even filmed... So, set in Maine, filmed in Pennsylvania. Okay. And I wondered that because it does... When it shows Waterville, it very clearly is not Waterville.
Right.
And so I was curious about that.
This whole kooky idea of mine to do these hometown episodes worked out in the end.
Yes. We just keep coming back, actually, to Pennsylvania.
We do.
We just keep coming back.
And why not?
Fair point. But I will say one thing in terms of the main kind of motif about Wet Hot American Summer. Not so much in terms of class, although it is related to class. And that is something that certainly always drove and probably still does drive Maine people crazy, right? Is the idea that for so many people, it is simply a rentable place for the summer. Right. And obviously we touch upon this a little bit in A Summer Place, but there it's sort of skewed because the rich guy coming back is native, right? He's not from away. He's native.
Right.
But, of course, to see that in Wet Hot American Summer, right, or a bunch of other things, where the idea is this is a place where, we go to in the summer, we send our kids in the summer. Yes. And we have no investment in it. Right. And you never see, of course, anybody really, except maybe at the crack house. You don't see anyone from Maine, right, in Wet Hot American Summer.
Right.
And so that also, of course, that speaks a profound truth about the state of Maine.
Okay.
Right. That it is simply a playground
and
for some people. And usually for richer people.
From the Jersey Shore, I can relate to that.
Yes. And I'm certainly, I've forgiven you for the fact that you went to camp there. But I will say, one of our colleagues, who I hope is not listening, one of our colleagues suggested to me that he might retire to the state of Maine.
Oh.
And I gave him some advice about stuff, and I did not say, which of course any Maine native is tempted to say, which is that we don't want you there.
Right.
We don't want you there. Right. If you are not already a native of Maine, I'm sorry, but you can't come in.
It's sort of like Judaism.
Exactly. You have to knock on the door 3 times.
And we still may not want you.
And you still may not, as I just saw with Charlotte again, since I just rewatched that arc. But you don't have a ritual bath. You don't have the mikvah.
No, there's no.
In the state of Maine. There's no ritual bath. Except
the sandwich. You're going to eat the sandwich.
You eat the sandwich, and then you actually go swimming in the freezing cold Atlantic Ocean.
And then you watch 4 Stephen King movies and take a test on them.
That's your mikvah. You emerge again a native of Maine. No, I'm kidding. Anyone who's listening who wants to actually do that. But yes, that's your mikvah.
All right.
Okay, so are we going to have any... This is actually a week where we probably should have book recommendations.
Okay, I do actually.
Oh, good.
Do.
Excellent.
I have a book recommendation, and it in some ways harkens back to your ideas about Puritanism. And my book is Devil in the Shape of a Woman, Witchcraft in Colonial New England.
Excellent.
Which is all about the study of course, witches, witchcraft, the Salem witch trials, but goes beyond the Salem witch trials. It's not Maine, but it is New England, or colonial New England. It is authored by Carol Carlson. We'll post it in the show notes, but it really talks about gender and mysticism and spirituality and non-normativity and all kinds of things relating to witchcraft. And it's one of the better books on the Salem witch trials, and but writ large ideas about women in New England as witches, which we could think of Carrie as
Yes, absolutely.
absolutely one
Yes.
of the women burned at the stake.
Yes,
very literally.
very literally.
So that is my suggestion for the week.
Well, that sounds great, and I will, of course, also point out that at the time of the Salem witch trials, there was no state of Maine because
Right.
the territory was still part of Massachusetts until
Right.
1820.
So it technically is a Maine book.
Technically, even though Salem was not in Maine territory, but technically. Well, mine is actually going to be the Sonnets of Edna St. Vincent Millay. Unlike Stephen King, a writer from the state of Maine who lived in a very, very different time, a poet chiefly famous in the 1920s. She was a celebrity very much as kind of the quote-unquote girl poet after she had won a major prize after graduating from Vassar. She was a Seven Sisters girl, just like you.
Okay.
And the poems, a lot of them do reflect Maine. They reflect, Maine geographically, but they also reflect very much a kind of Maine ethos, filtered through her very sort of independent style, and some really, really wonderful poems. So that's what I will be putting in our show notes.
Okay, excellent. This is a lot of Maine. I feel like we've really raked it through. And we have the Emmys on Sunday night.
So excited.
So hopefully we will have some comments about that in our next show.
I can't wait.
Until then,
Until then, Harpies
Harpies out.
out.